The funding is exactly the same as was on offer in 2010-11. So it should aim to provide the same number of advisors and meet the same level of need, I hope.
So this will replace the funding, and those 500 debt advisors, many of whom have been given redundancy notices, can now tear them up and go back to work.
Well, I hope so, Paul. I appreciate it's been a very anxious time.
But why did you wait 3 weeks? Because 3 weeks ago you said you were closing one fund. 3 weeks later you say you're giving them the money back.
Well, what we had to do is think very carefully about how we provide debt advice. Given the straitened times we're in, every decision has to be looked at very carefully. And what I didn't want to do was give false hope, but I also was trying to find some way of ensuring that for 2011-12 that the support will be there for people in need of advice and counselling from CAB and others.
This is a one-year settlement. What you've just said might make people think that, well, this is a kind of stopgap, and a year from now something else will be announced that will be slightly different and slightly cheaper.
Well, what I think we need to do is to look at those different sources of debt advice, and I'm keen to work with the Consumer Financial Education Body to look at a holistic approach. So we do have a range of sources out there that people know where to turn to, and that there's greater coordination.
But the more you say, Mark Hoban, the more I feel that this really is something temporary, and that a year from now you'll be saying, oh, go on the internet, pick up the phone. We don't really need all this expensive face-to-face stuff.
I know, Paul, I've seen face-to-face advice being given, and I think for many people it is the right answer. But I think for a number of people, there are other alternatives out there that might be available when they need it, rather than being forced to queue, to wait for an appointment, or whether they just put off by delays and just and don't tackle their problems.
But you can't give any assurance about another £27 million for 2012-13.
But I think what we need to do, Paul, is to look ahead and see.
Well, that's what I'm asking you to do. 2012-13.
I think what we need to do is spend some time looking ahead at how do we provide this advice to people. How do we bring together the various sources of advice and have a coherent picture?
Is the government committed to face-to-face debt advice by this number of people?
Look, I think face-to-face debt advice is really important. I know how many people value it, and I think it's important it's continued. But what we need to find out, I think, in the 21st century, what's the best way to meet the needs of people? How do we make sure we signpost them to the service that will benefit them the most? How can we actually make sure there's debt advice when people need it, so they're not tied to office hours? I think there's an opportunity here, Paul, to really modernise this service.